Don't touch me. Not here. Not in front of him. He doesn't need to know I have a husband. Those were my wife's words. And before I could process a single syllable of them, the wine hit my chest, cold red, spreading through my white dress shirt like something ceremonial, like a verdict being read out loud. My name is Tony Anderson. I am 36 years old. I have closed deals on 3 continents, sat across tables from men who tried to bury me, and never once flinched in a room where the pressure was designed to break me. But standing in the middle of a marble-floor ballroom on a Friday night in October, soaked in my wife's Cabernet, with 200 people suddenly very interested in my shirt, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was 9 years old, standing in the kitchen in Raleigh, reading a note my father left on the counter before he disappeared forever. I felt like I had miscounted something important. The gala was Hartwell and Associates' annual company celebration, the kind of event that existed to make people feel like they were part of something bigger than their job title. Chandelier light, a live jazz quartet tucked into the corner, waitstaff moving to the crowd like quiet ghosts with trays of champagne. Leah had talked about this night for 3 weeks. The dress, burgundy, fitted the one she'd ordered twice because the first shipment was the wrong shade. The speech she'd been rehearsing for when she finally got close enough to director Blake Hartwell to remind him, elegantly, that she was the only logical choice for the VP role he hadn't yet filled. She had spent 3 weeks preparing for this night. I had spent 11 hours on a plane. I hadn't told her I was coming. I'd been in Dallas, a portfolio review that was supposed to run through the weekend, when Gerald Whitmore called me at 9:47 p.m. the night before and said something that got under my skin in a way I'm still not fully able to explain. I booked the morning flight before we hung up. I wanted to walk through those doors and see her face do what it used to do in year one, when I'd show up somewhere unexpected, and she'd look at me like the surprise itself was the gift. I was still thinking about that look on the cab ride over. I found her near the east side of the room, champagne flute in one hand, laughing at something a colleague had said. She was radiant. She always was in rooms like this. Something in her came alive around ambition and performance and the electricity of people trying to impress each other. I had loved that about her once. I walked toward her with my hand, already extended, already reaching. She saw me coming, and something moved across her face that wasn't joy. Please kindly share, and subscribe for more interesting stories. She looked at me the way you look at a problem that showed up at the wrong time. Not surprise, not warmth, calculation. I still reached for her. My hand landed on her waist, familiar, automatic, the way you touch someone you've slept beside for 3 years. She stepped back like my fingers were a lit match. Tony. Her voice was a warning dressed as a greeting. I flew in, I said. Wanted to surprise you. You should have called. She wasn't looking at me. She was scanning the room over my shoulder. I turned slightly and caught a man watching us from across the floor, tall, composed, holding his glass with the easy confidence of someone who owned every conversation he entered. Blake Hartwell. I'd seen his photo in company documents enough times to recognize him immediately. I turned back to Leah. Can I at least get a hug from my wife? That was when the temperature in her eyes dropped completely. Don't, she said, low, deliberate. Don't hug me in front of my boss. He doesn't need to know I'm married. I heard it, every word, clean and separate, like stones dropped one at a time into still water. The wine came next. I don't think she planned it. I think the silence after what she said stretched long enough that people nearby started turning, and panic did what panic does to people who care more about appearances and consequences. It reached for the nearest exit. The glass tilted. The wine left it, and $200 worth of dry cleaning landed against my chest in a single cold sheet. Someone gasped. Someone laughed, short, uncomfortable, immediately swallowed. Leah's eyes went wide the second it happened, and I could see her trying to decide in real time whether to apologize or commit to performance. She chose performance. She lifted her chin and looked at me like I was a disruption. Maybe I was. I stood there for 4 full seconds. I didn't wipe my shirt. I didn't raise my voice. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and I saw something I hadn't let myself see in 18 months of slow distance and quiet dinners and conversations that stayed safely on the surface. She had already left. She just hadn't told me yet. I reached into my breast pocket. The card was dry. Somehow, I held it between two fingers for a moment, just long enough to feel the weight of what I was about to do, then placed it gently on the tray of a waiter passing close enough to make it easy. "Make sure Director Hartwell gets that," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. The waiter nodded without breaking stride. I watched him cross the room. I watched him approach Hartwell. I watched Hartwell accept the card the way men like him accept everything, with the mild, unruffled curiosity of someone who has never once expected bad news. He looked at it. Something shifted in his posture. Subtle, the way a building shifts before a foundation crack announces itself. He looked up, across the room, found my face. I held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then turned and walked toward the exit, without looking back at Leah. I heard her say my name once, Tony, and it came out confused, like a word in a language she'd suddenly forgotten how to speak. The October air hit me the moment the lobby doors opened. I stopped and breathed. I had grown up understanding exits. My father's had come on a Thursday. I was 9. I woke up for school and found my mother standing in the kitchen, holding a folded note, still in her hospital scrubs from the overnight shift, not crying, which was the part that scared me most. She wasn't crying. She was just standing there with the note, like she was trying to decide whether it was real. It said, "I'm sorry. I'm not built for this." 7 words to dismantle a family. I kept that note, not because I missed him. I stopped missing him by 12, but because I studied it. I wanted to understand what made a man decide that leaving was easier than staying and working to the hard thing. I wanted to identify every quality in that note and burn it out of myself. So I stayed in everything. I stayed when investments looked wrong. I stayed through Gerald Whitmore's lectures when I was 26 and broke and too proud to admit I needed help. I stayed in my marriage through 11 days of silence and solo dinners and a wife who looked through me at dinner tables. I had stayed too long. I understood that now. Gerald had called me at 9:47 p.m. I was on my second drink at the hotel bar in Dallas, staring at a city skyline that looked impressive and meant nothing, when my phone lit up with his name. We talked for maybe 12 minutes. He asked about the portfolio review. I gave him the short version. Then he went quiet in that specific way Gerald goes quiet when he's about to say something that costs him something. "You sound like a man staring at his own exit," he said. I didn't answer. "Your father stared at his for a year before he took it." He'd only ever mentioned my father once before, years ago, after I'd told him too much over bourbon at a closing dinner. "The difference between you and him is you've never been afraid to walk toward the hard thing." We hung up 20 minutes later. I sat with the silence for a while. Then I opened my phone and booked the first morning flight to Atlanta. I told myself I was walking toward the hard thing. I thought that meant saving my marriage. I didn't yet understand that sometimes walking toward the hard thing means finally accepting what's already gone. Standing outside the venue, the city moved around me like it had no idea anything had happened. Cabs. Conversations spilling from a restaurant across the street. A couple walking a dog, arguing softly about nothing important. Normal Friday night Atlanta, completely indifferent to the fact that my marriage had just ended in a ballroom 40 feet behind me. I had 4 minutes before my driver arrived. I stood in those 4 minutes and let myself go back. I went back to a Tuesday, 2 years into dating Leah, a terrible Thai restaurant in Durham, where the power cut out halfway through dinner. The candles the staff lit were uneven, one table bright, the next nearly dark. Leah had laughed at something I said and knocked her water glass directly into my lap and grabbed my hand across the table, apologizing and laughing at the same time, her whole face open, unguarded, completely herself. I had thought that night, this is the woman I want. I had been right about the woman she was that night. I had been wrong about how long she would stay that woman. My driver pulled up. I got in. I looked out the window the entire ride. Priscilla Webb had been watching Leah for 14 months. Priscilla occupied the desk 2 rows from Leah's on the 4th floor of Hartwell and Associates. Close enough to notice things. Professional enough to say nothing. She had noticed the rings. On some mornings, both of them, catching the office light. On other mornings, bare fingers. The explanation was always casual. Skin irritation. Forgot them, left him at home. Small enough to dismiss, consistent enough to file away. She had noticed the way Leah recalibrated whenever Blake Hartwell entered a room. Shoulders back, voice lifted slightly, laughter arriving a half-second faster than usual. The way a performance activates when its intended audience appears. She had asked once, directly, after a team lunch that went a beat too warm, "Is there something going on between you and Hartwell?" Leah had said, "He's my boss." Not a denial, a deflection dressed as one. Priscilla had been standing 6 feet away when Tony reached for Leah at the gala. She heard every word Leah said. She watched the wine pour. She watched Tony place the card on the tray without raising his voice. By 9 a.m. Monday morning, she had told the entire floor what that card read. Blake Hartwell read the card twice. The first time quickly, the reflexive scan of a man used to processing information fast. The second time slowly, because the first time hadn't fully landed. Tony R. Anderson, chairman and silent owner, Hartwell and Associates Holdings. He looked up, found the man in the wet shirt already walking toward the exit, watched him go, watched the lobby doors close behind him. Blake Hartwell had run this company for 6 years, believing he understood its architecture completely. His father had structured the ownership quietly, a holding arrangement, a silent partner, someone Gerald Whitmore had recommended when the firm needed capital to expand. Blake had been told the partner was hands-off. He had accepted that description the way men accept things that don't inconvenience them. He looked across the room at Leah Anderson. She was staring at the lobby doors with the expression of someone watching the ground reorganize beneath their feet. Her champagne flute was still in her hand, empty now, tilted slightly like she'd forgotten she was holding it. Blake walked toward her slowly. He held the card loosely between his fingers. When he reached her, he let the silence exist for a full moment before speaking. "Mrs. Anderson," he said carefully, "I think we need to talk about your promotion." Leah called me 6 times before I reached the hotel. I watched the screen light up each time. Her name, the photo I'd never changed, the 2 of us at Tybee Island, 2nd year of marriage, her laughing at something off camera, salt in her hair. I watched it light up and go dark. Light up and go dark. I didn't answer. The 7th call I declined manually, because watching it ring felt like a cruelty I didn't need to participate in anymore. She texted after that. "Tony, please. You don't understand what you've done." I read it once. I set the phone face down on the hotel nightstand. What she meant was, "You don't understand what you've done to me," to her position, to the carefully constructed version of herself she'd been maintaining at Hartwell and Associates for over a year. The unencumbered professional, the woman with no domestic weight, pulling at her ambitions, the version of Leah that didn't include a husband who might show up and complicate the image. She wasn't wrong that I disrupted something. She was wrong about what that something was worth protecting. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called my attorney. My attorney was a woman named Denise Carroll, sharp, direct, allergic to sentiment in professional settings, which was exactly why I'd hired her 4 years ago. She answered on the 2nd, ring despite it being past 11 on a Friday. I told her what happened. Concise. No editorializing. She was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to move immediately, or do you want to sleep on it?" "I've been sleeping on it for 18 months. I said. "Okay." Papers shifted. A keyboard. "I'll have the preliminary paperwork ready by Monday. What about the Hartwell stake?" This was the part I'd been sitting with since the lobby. My 43% holding in Hartwell and Associates had never been about control. It had been an investment, a quiet one, profitable, managed at arm's length while Blake ran the operations. I'd never interfered, never intended to, but the company had a VP position sitting open, and the most qualified candidate, genuinely qualified. I had seen her work, reviewed her numbers without her ever knowing, had just poured wine on me in a ballroom and told 200 people I didn't exist. "Leave the stake as is," I told Denise. "But no promotion gets approved without my signature." She wrote it down. Monday morning came gray and quiet. I was back in Dallas by then, a deliberate choice. Distance that was geographical rather than emotional for the first time in a long time. Gerald Whitmore called at 8 a.m. I told him the short version. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I valued most about him. You walked toward it, he said when I finished. I walked out of it. I said, same direction, he said, depending on where you're standing. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. I thought about my mother in her kitchen scrubs, holding a note, not crying, how she had rebuilt, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a kind of patient, unbreakable steadiness that I had absorbed without realizing it, the way children absorb everything through proximity and repetition, and watching someone refuse to quit. I thought about Leah the way she was at that Thai restaurant, the way she laughed, the way she grabbed my hand. I let myself feel the grief of that, the clean, honest grief of losing someone you genuinely loved, not to death, but to the slow drift of who they chose to become. Then I opened my laptop, pulled up the Hartwell Holdings file, and got back to work.